want to make, and we'll have some more people logging in, I think, as we go. But first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We expect the presentation will take somewhere around 30 or 35 minutes, and we'll leave the Q&A to the end for a couple of reasons. As I just mentioned to Einar, we're expecting somewhere around 50 people on the line today, so it's a bit awkward to juggle calls during the presentation, but we'll have time at the end. In the meantime, your phones are all muted, and we'll explain how to unmute them at the end to ask questions. And as I was saying to Einar, this session is actually being recorded and will be available online, and I'll give you the details later on. It should be available online towards the end of the week, in addition to some of the other webinar information that we have. My name is Rob Coatsworth. I'm a Queen's Center for Business Venturing business advisor for the last couple of years, but I've actually been involved with activity at Queen's University in various facilities basically over the last 10 years. My colleague online today is Einar Westerlund, who's also a business advisor and director of project development at Queen's Center for Business Venturing, and has been involved with the BSME study since its inception 9 years ago. So this year actually marks the 10th anniversary of the study, so we're kind of pleased about that. What we want to cover today basically is to go back over the engagement model. What does that mean, and what does it cover? To explain the value of the survey. Why do you want to do this? We're going to go through some example of survey outputs and explain how we interpret and use those outputs to create action plans. And finally, we're going to include some lessons learned from the top 50 over the past 9 years, including some comments on managing the survey process itself. So what I'd like to do, introduce Einar to talk about the engagement model and explain how it works, and we can link that then back to how the survey delves into all these different areas. So please, Einar.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Hello, everybody. And after 10 years in the saddle here, I'm sure I may have met some of you who are on the line, but hello to all of you, and hope to meet those of you that I haven't. The engagement model that you see in the slide that's on the screen right now is really just summarizes the product of many, many years of research into answers to the question, what is it that engages employees? And we've identified 21 so-called drivers of engagement. That's everything you see around the circle that's in non-boldface type. And the drivers fall into 6 family areas, as you can see: rewards, procedures, work, and so forth. These account, as far as we know from our research, for about 75 to 80% of an individual employee's engagement or commitment to the success of the enterprise. And that obviously isn't everything, but it's the vast majority of factors we know of. The balance, by the way, the remaining 20 to 25% of an employee's engagement will be very organizational specific. For example, I was dealing with this morning with an organization which was family owned and founded and is undergoing some leadership transitions because of that. And that would be a unique factor that is not included in the questionnaire, but it would be potentially affecting the engagement of employees. But most of what it would be affecting it is seen in this circle. But the reason for the converging arrows there, all pointing toward engagement, that's the centerpiece, the box score, the level of employee commitment, is that we're trying to portray the idea that everything is connected with everything else, and that certain of these engagement driver items, like up there at the 11 o'clock position, is something called managing performance, everything that an employee experiences by way of having expectations conveyed to him or her, and coaching along the way, and then an annual review process. The way that's handled, we know, has quite an impact on drivers in many of the other areas you see around the cycle, such as in the rewards, the people area, the work itself, and opportunities, and so forth. So they are all interconnected. At the end of the day, when you get your results, those of you who are familiar with the study know that you don't need to really worry about tracking 21 driver areas, although you get scores on all those in your reports. At the end of the day, usually there's a cluster of about 6 to 8 of those driver areas which would account for the majority of the impact on differences between your most engaged and less engaged people. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is the basic formula we use to calculate and compute factors affecting engagement.
Rob? Thanks, Einar. Just a note on the methodology here. Einar referred to the 21 different engagement drivers, and the surveys Basically, the series of questions relate to each of those 21 different drivers. There's three different survey components, two of which deal with engagement. One is for the leadership team, one is for the employees, which provides, as you say here, an important picture of the alignment and cohesion between these two groups. So they're dealing with the same engagement drivers, but from slightly different perspectives. And we'll show you in a few minutes how we use that information to highlight areas for deeper review. The third part of the survey is more sort of administrative information about your companies, which is an HR survey. So those are the three sort of main components. One of the things we talk about is that employee satisfaction is really sort of a happiness factor, but the true engagement goes a lot deeper than that. It really goes to employees striving to help your business succeed. And I've just added a couple of quotes here from one of the professors at the School of Business that emphasizes that. It's about spotting a problem and doing something about it. It's wanting to really improve your business. So why do you want to take this survey? And it really represents a very powerful management tool. In addition to looking at factors that affect employee satisfaction, employee trust, and so on, the survey looks at operations, processes, and resources, and the interaction between them. So it becomes a very actionable tool that supports organizational effectiveness. Now, we did a similar presentation about 2 weeks ago on April the 4th, and interestingly, kind of by coincidence, on April 5th, there was an article in the Globe and Mail business section, which some of you may have seen, and it was talking about employee engagement, and specifically talking about Canadian Tire and a very large company-wide initiative they have going right now to improve their employee engagement. And they talked about why they do it and what their expected outcomes are, which are all the things we talk about here. And it also talked about some of the things that TD Canada Trust is doing. Now, if you're interested, Kara has a link to that article, so if you can contact her, she can provide it to you. It's a fairly short article, but it's worth a read, and it's just showing that, employee engagement is important, and it does have an ROI. When we talk about, what are the things that the more engaged employee companies have, they're a more desirable place to work, so they find that people want to come and work for them, so they're attracting and retaining the best employees. And one way we describe the survey is assessing what we call say, stay, and strive. Say is what employees say about their work, about their employer, to their friends and family. Stay is the employee wanting to stay on their job, stay with their employer because it's a good place to work. And those two things together we consider to be sort of the employee satisfaction aspect. But it's the striving, which is really where the engagement is seen. And that is, the employees want to come into work every day, and they want their company to succeed. So what we see with engaged employees is there's reduced absenteeism and turnover, increased productivity, and the fact that you've got an engaged workplace leads to more engaged and loyal customers. And a kind of favorite and visible example of that is WestJet. So I'd really like to emphasize the fact that the survey outputs really are a very powerful management tool, and they really support organizational effectiveness. I'd like to turn now to to show some examples of some of the survey outputs. At the very highest level, there's an overall engagement scoring, which you get, and when you're doing the survey over a period of years, you can track how you're doing. There's the high level, company-wide engagement level. There's engagement scoring for each of the different 21 engagement drivers that Einar described a few minutes ago. Plus, you have the opportunity to benchmark against the what we call the database, which is all the other companies that are in the survey. And we also have breakdowns that show how the top 50 is doing, how the top 10 are doing, so you can really get a sense of where you stand relative to other companies that are in the survey. Through custom benchmarking, we can break down the companies that are in the survey into probably about a dozen different types. There may be IT companies, there may be financial institutions, there may be not-for-profits. So you can really get a better sense of where you stand relative to companies that are like yourself. And one example would be for not-for-profits, which have really different stakeholder objectives and governance models. So we do have quite a few not-for-profits in the survey. So the sort of custom benchmarking is an interesting reporting option. We also have the ability to break down when you're setting the survey up, to break your company down into departments or geographic regions, which is very helpful. The more granular detail allows for deeper insight into your operations and may help to highlight issues. I mentioned earlier that we do, one of the surveys is a leadership team, and the reason this is important is that it's critical to have a 100% engaged and committed leadership team in order to have an engaged organization. It's also important to understand that the leadership team is aligned around their priorities, because the alignment ensures that there is a coherent and coordinated communication down throughout the organization. And I mentioned that the reason we do the leadership team survey and the employee survey is to see where there are gaps in perceptions of how the business is doing in certain aspects. So one of the key outputs is the leader-employee gap. And what we see here is this is really an indicator of where there's significant differences in perceptions across all these drivers between the employees and the leadership team. So the comparison allows you to see how each group sees these issues and where there are divergences. High gaps indicate a need for a much deeper review. What we find is very often it's simply a communication gap, but sometimes the gap signals a really burning issue. So if you look, for example, at the senior leadership gap, which is the fifth one from the bottom, when you look at an example like that and see a significant gap, this is really a big red flag telling us that management thinks things are that the way they're managing and how the employees think they're doing is widely divergent. So that becomes something that you really need to dive into and understand better. And also in this output, you can see the black diamonds up and down are the database average. So this is another aspect of benchmarking that you can benefit from. A new area of focus in 2013 was what we call manager effectiveness. So the survey respondents, the employees in this case, are ranking their manager as highly effective, moderately effective, or low effective. And the results of this are really quite startling. Those ranking their manager as highly effective have far higher than average engagement scores, and those ranking their manager as moderately effective have far lower than average scores. So what we see is that effective managers make a very big difference to engagement. Just as an example, to kind of show you how startling that the impact is, the first one of the questions here, the recognition, I receive appropriate recognition beyond pay and benefits, my contributions and or accomplishment. And you see that the respondents who rated their manager as highly effective, their engagement level was 76%. And the employees that rated their manager as moderately effective had an engagement level of 8%. So this is a very high engagement factor. It's often said that employees don't leave a company, they leave their managers. Now, when you look at the responses to the questions here, they may seem extreme, but they're not atypical. Through the survey, we collect demographic details which provide very helpful insights into consistency or hotspots that may need specific attention. The specific example on the screen here is years of service, but we also have analysis available by excuse me, by generation, gender, other demographic factors. And what these pieces of analysis do is provide not answers but insights. And every company will probably respond in a different way. But we do find some significant things. For example, from an engagement point of view, that the generational aspect of millennials versus boomers, for example, is often comes up as a wide difference in engagement. And there's things that you can do to address those, but again, it provides some very interesting insights into what's happening within your company. Looking at the engagement drivers impact review, each of the engagement drivers is supported by a series of questions. So there's a box score for the engagement driver overall, and then there's measures for each of the individual questions underlying that. And together with that, on the right-hand side, you see the red and white boxes, which are potential negative impact and potential positive impact of each of those factors. And we'll turn now to a specific example around recognition that shows you how we use that information.
Just a comment on the this impact study, which many folks who've been in the program over the years tell us is one of the most valuable sections. It's not a very large section and very readable that you get, but one of the most meaningful slides that you'll get, pages in that report, are the first 2 pages. You don't happen to see them here. These are examples of how individual drivers and sub-drivers are rated in terms of their impact on the drivers. But the first page actually gives you a rank ordering of the most important drivers in priority order in terms of their impact on your own people. It's a custom report that's just driven by your own data, nobody else's, with a special statistical analysis tool. So that right away enables you to narrow the 21 drivers down to the top 6 or 8 I referred to earlier, which would be your action areas. Once you've got that, then within those areas, you're likely to find something like career opportunities and recognition, which Rob has referred to here, where you can do a further drill down to see what specific behaviors are affecting those high-impact drivers.
Yeah, thanks. The 2 things I wanted to highlight here in terms of what the information is showing us, if you look at the top 2 questions with the blue arrows beside them, you can see that the strongly agree response is quite a bit below the overall box score. So that's obviously an area that you want to dive into and sort of understand why the employees are not feeling particularly supportive of the way things are working. There's probably an indication of need for some kind of change in that area. The next 2, with the yellow arrows beside them, what I wanted to show you there is the red and white bars indicate that they have a very, very high negative impact potential. So although the scoring for the 2 questions in case in point here, the scoring is above the overall box score, what this shows you is that the potential impact of slacking off or weakening in those 2 areas could have a very significant negative impact on the organization. So this sort of information really helps to assess where the focus should be to change as well as to reinforce existing practices within your organization. So at the end of it, in many cases, Ina or I will present a summary of the results. In other cases, clients will analyze and formulate their own action plans on their own. Usually what we find is that it makes sense to take on 3 or 4 different areas for the coming year. More than that becomes difficult to manage, but 3 or 4 seems to be fairly manageable. But it really is an opportunity to sit back and say, which drivers will have the biggest impact? And as Ina said, one of the reports will actually show you, based on the survey results, which ones those may be, which is a good guide or direction for you. But what we always emphasize is that this is an ongoing process. It's continuous improvement. It's a journey that's not solved in 1 year. It takes a lot of courage to start, but it takes a lot of commitment to stay with it. Now, Kara has a participant's kit, which she calls her tricks and tips, which has some very helpful messaging samples and other supporting ideas for managing the process. But Ina's just going to talk to us for a few minutes here about insights from our experience with the survey about what some of the top 50 companies are doing to manage the survey process more effectively.
Yes, thank you, Rob. And Kara, by the way, in Kingston, and her colleague Sandra are the real experts because of all their work at the front end on registration. But in terms of what goes on inside organizations, the key thing to remember, particularly if your organization is new to the survey, is it may be a bit of a strange activity for the employees. There may be some uncertainties around it. There are concerns about confidentiality and so forth. These are all typical and normal if, in fact, the survey activity or something like it hasn't occurred before. So even ahead of getting into the survey, you want to take a look at your own history. Are employees used to being pulsed in this way or other ways? Have they done this before? What has been your experience, their experience, and the organization's experience with this sort of activity? You also want to scan the environment, see are there current important developments which might affect the mood in current times. They won't affect the basic opinions about the drivers, but they might affect some flavoring of some of the feedback that you'll get. For example, if there's a significant restructuring going on and so forth, sometimes it's helpful in advance to tap the opinions of some of your key opinion leaders in the organization about the exercise and what they think is going to be needed to make it successful. Then you develop a campaign. The senior team is absolutely key to this, and they have to be very visibly behind it. Usually something goes out from the CEO to kick it off. Best from the CEO, by the way, not from HR, so that it's seen as a true important corporate effort. Get as many people involved as you think you need to in advance, just letting them know what's coming down and what's going to be needed to get the support of their people. That might include, by the way, in a unionized environment, getting some of the members of the key members of the bargaining unit involved, just to ensure there's support out there among their folks. Even board members sometimes get involved. We've seen that happen. Communication is real key to what are we doing, why are we doing it, what's the product of this, what's the process that's going to be followed, and here you lay out sort of a basic roadmap of what's going to happen before, during, and after the survey, without promising changes or transformations or anything, but just show what the process is going to be for getting the information fed back to people, having senior leadership review it, determining what actions need to be taken, and so on. And with that, there's also the anticipation of issues. These, by the way, will, if not foreseen, can kind of make life a little bit difficult during the period. Many organizations now, I know many of them here, particularly in GTA, that I've had some familiarity with, have different languages. One organization, by the way, had 15 languages in a small, medium organization with about 250 people in it, in cultures. And so what support might be needed and the special communication provisions for them, access to online. You do have a paper option, by the way, for remote sites or for people who may or may not, for whatever reason, have online access or comfort with it. Make sure that everybody's aware of the what-ifs at the senior level. What if there's, serious questions that come up coincidentally with other corporate developments at the same time the survey is being done? How's the organization going to respond? And mainly you want encouragement and support for the participation in the survey, because this is the beginning of an engagement improvement intervention in itself, the actual conducting of the survey. You don't need to wait for results, but the way you handle this whole exercise will be a contributor potentially to getting you a head start on engagement. And with that, then during the survey, you can track real time what's going on, response rates and so forth. You want to make sure that if you're lagging the expected response rate deep into the count as far as the month goes along, that some sort of reminder system goes out, and you want to make sure that it's continually brought home to people. This is very important. Is a business initiative. It's not a flavor of the month thing. It's something we're very serious about, are taking seriously, and will follow through on. So you want to build conviction and trust, because remember, there will be issues of concern about what's the meaning of this in terms of the life of the employee. That's pretty much the tips. So there have been many lessons learned over the years from the top of the chart to the top 50, as we call them. I'll say of about 160, 170 organizations that might be participating. There will be a top 50 based on their engagement score. But also it's worthwhile looking at the other end of the equation, which is what is it that differentiates those who don't make the top 50 from those who do, those at the lower end. I think the point here that really needs to be brought home is that there are many lessons you'll want to learn depending on what your intentions are. For example, basic workforce management issues, your approach to attracting, recruiting, developing, and retaining key talent is an area where you're bound to learn some lessons, but describe the lessons, spell out the lessons you'd like to learn in advance about the management of your organization's human capital. That'll help you learn your own lessons. What we've learned is, of course, the top is the key. Senior leadership is a major driver of engagement in itself. It often doesn't realize that. So its visibility, accessibility, its conveyance of the organizational direction, trust people have, and confidence, that's a big factor, and it's often overlooked as senior leaders say, well, we want to hear about how people feel about our recognition systems and promotions and so forth, but that's actually feedback about themselves. You want to have a good plan for sharing the survey results. And back to the senior leadership piece, of course, leadership behavior and deployment, how they're deployed in a small, medium enterprises, particularly a high-impact area that often is not obvious right away until you start to dig into what you're seeing in the results. So, other than that, the cultural factor, culture, just the way things are done around here, the invisible values as well as the written values are key in engagement, and there's no question that an open, trusting culture in which both the good news and bad news are communicated, and if people want upfront feedback about the organization's status, what they can expect so they can get ready for it. That's a key to engagement. In general, trust in senior leadership is fundamentally geared to what they think they're hearing, our promises being kept, and so forth. The whole recognition picture, Rob's already referred to as the formal part of recognition, which is programmatic, awards and events and things. But really, our experience is that recognition, one of the main driver areas, is made up of mostly behavioral elements. Does anybody ever ask my opinion? Do we provide recognition because it's part of our culture or just as a reaction? Is it done vertically and horizontally and in all directions, or do we always expect it to come from above? There are very important questions to be answered here because the feeling that I am acknowledged for my contributions to the organization is very key in my engagement. As is my involvement, my participation, my influence on my own, the direction of my area and my job and so forth. So those are among important lessons. This page, this slide that you're looking at here really is summarized in terms of what you'll hear by way of feedback about how performance is managed in your organization, because that's the real opportunity to connect people and their individual efforts and their performance reviews and their coaching, their current goals, even their job description, to what the organization is trying to achieve. That's all called performance management, and it's not just an annual review we're talking about here. It's really about a complete performance management approach evident throughout the employee's year. Usually part of that discussion and also separate discussions is, what about my opportunities for personal growth here? Again, one of the very high impact areas and opportunities for advancement. All SMEs face the same problem and challenge, and that is, by definition, they're they're small, medium, they don't have a lot of opportunities for vertical progression. And so what employee advancement means in the best employers is personal growth at a slightly different dimension than simple vertical progression up a hierarchy. If you're more sophisticated and further along in your organizational maturity path, then their active succession and career path planning can be an important factor, but you don't want to get into that too early when the organization really isn't ready to actually do something about that and act on what it says. So those are some of the real key lessons that we have learned, among many, many others.
This is just sort of a visual summary of what we just talked about. Is some of the components that make up the culture of engagement: the open, trusting environment, participative decision-making, shared expectations, and importantly, individual recognition. So those things all together represent the culture that underscores your engagement. We can't claim ownership to this very clever device, the master plan, but it really neatly summarizes the steps of continuous improvement and increased engagement. So it really, when you look at it, the survey is sort of the first 2 or 3 items on there, but basically the outputs then become where are the areas you want to focus? How do you execute on those? And when you've established improvement, how do you reinforce those, and how do you celebrate those kinds of gains? So all very important.
And that master plan, by the way, one reason taking ownership, although I put the initials on it there as the so-called master plan, is actually that's just based on observation over 10 years of what the most successful organizations, which get the most bang for the buck out of their participation in the study, actually seem to do on a very systematic, disciplined basis. And these are sort of the 6 steps that emerge, and they're a continuous cycle because, as Rob mentioned earlier, we do view engagement as a journey and not as an event that is all going to be dealt with by one or more projects this particular year.
Yeah, it's continuous improvement. Just wanted to talk for a minute here about, we've been doing a series of webinars, and this one today is being recorded. Kara did one yesterday on in-depth reporting, which, so the two of these will be available online by the end of the week, and this is where you can access them at the bsnestudycanada.com website. If you scroll to the bottom of the page, the home page, there's a button there to click on our webinars. I'd highly recommend, if you haven't seen the in-depth reporting, to go and spend some time looking at that when it's available later this week, because it really explains the different options that are available, ranging from the complimentary, very high-level reporting where you get the overall company engagement score and the scores for the drivers, but that's it, through to the levels of detail, some of which we've highlighted today, that give you much deeper insights into what's going on within your organization. And there is actually a full online access available, which provides a very detailed analysis capability. So I highly recommend having a look at that. At this point, if you have any questions, if you just hit *6 to unmute your phone, we'd be happy to invite comments or questions, and please. Well, it sounds like there may not be any questions. Hopefully we've just provided all the answers. Either that or we've given you way too much information. I'm not quite sure which.
Well, hopefully that dropout on audio that we experienced there didn't leave people somewhere out of the loop. Of course, the replay of this will give you a chance to catch up. I just would note at the bottom of the slide that Rob has up there is that this means that the week after next is when employees across the country are going to be starting to log in and enter their views. And by the way, in a typical year, we will be recording and picking up the views of probably 22 or 3,000 Canadian small medium enterprise employees. So that actually starts, I guess, in less than 10 days now when we fire up the circuits to collect employee input.
Yeah, and I think that typically companies will take about a 2 or maybe 3 week window to process the survey through. And from an individual employee point of view, it takes about less than half an hour, probably 20 minutes, to actually go through and complete the survey. So it's not onerous, but I think as we were talking about earlier, managing through that process and managing expectations is a very important part of your planning and consideration. So with that, if you do have any questions or you want to follow up for that link to the Globe and Mail article I mentioned, this is Kara's contact information. Feel free to contact her. Any questions, and if you have stuff that either I can respond to, she can pass them along to us, and we can respond on that. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending today.
And just a parting note, too, I don't know whether it was mentioned earlier, Rob, I may have missed it, but the calendar here, May and June, of course, is log in. The summer, then, is to process, scrub, clean, and make sure that the data's on the up and ups and start to generate reports. But if you do register and have your people log in, you will get reports, have reports available by about the end of August and early September now. So that's the time frame.